Hi, everyone. Welcome. Give everyone a moment to sync their audio. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Alexander. I use she, her pronouns, and I have the privilege of serving Sigma Delta Tau as our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Chair. Our committee is excited to bring this important program to our membership, so thank you all so much for being here. Lawrence Ross attended the University of California, Berkeley, where he was initiated into Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated in 1985, and the University of California, Los Angeles, or UCLA, where he earned a bachelor's degree in history. Ross also has a Master's of Fine Arts, or an MFA, degree in screenwriting from UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. Lawrence Ross's first book, The Divine Nine, The History of African American Fraternities and Sororities, was the first book written about all 9 African American fraternities and sororities. The Divine Nine is a Los Angeles Times and Essence magazine bestseller. As a result, Ross has lectured at over 800 colleges and universities, speaking on issues of fraternalism, student development, and fraternity and sorority hazing. Ross's 7th book, Blackballed, The Black and White Politics of Race on America's Campuses, published by St. Martin Press. Blackballed explores the present and historical issues of racism on hundreds of American college campuses, and how that ties into today's Black Lives Matter campaign. Since it was published in February 2016, Ross has lectured at over 800 colleges and universities, including UCLA, Michigan, LSU, and the University of Oklahoma. Ross is also the owner of the 365ally.com, a new multi-vendor marketplace that centers businesses and services owned by marginalized communities: Black, Latinx, Asian American Pacific Islander, Indigenous, women, disabled, LGBTQ, and their allies. Ross lives in Los Angeles with his wife, April, and their son, Langston. Please join me in welcoming Lawrence Ross.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I know it's strange to be on Zoom, but I promise you, I am an expert at this. And tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a subject that I've been researching for, I guess, about a good 10 years now. But let me begin with a song. And it's a song you may or may not have heard. And it goes like this. There will never be a nigga SAE. There will never be a nigga SAE. You can hang it from a tree, but it'll never sign with me. There will never be a nigga SAE. Now, how many of you have heard that song before? I'm pretty sure some of you have heard it. How many of you all thought you lost your mind inviting me here to sing that song? Some of y'all in your hands, okay. That song was sung by these 2 guys, Parker Rice and Levi Pettit, 2 members of Sigma Alpha Epsilon at the University of Oklahoma. And this was in March of 2015, and they were on what they called a party bus, having a great old time. Basically, the bus was kind of designed to be a space where the fraternity and sorority members could go safely from one event to another. And so they're walking down the aisle singing this song, and someone decides to hold up their phone and record them. Now, typically when we see things like that, we think to ourselves, well, if I'm singing a song like that, I'm thinking to myself, I don't want people to actually see me actually singing this, so I'm going to stop. But they didn't. They kept singing it directly into the phone. But what they didn't understand is that the person who was recording them was offended. And they decided to send it to this group, OU Unheard. Now, OU Unheard is an African-American student group at the University of Oklahoma, still to this day. And it just so happened that they had met with the university 2 months prior in January 2015. And they talked about the fact that they were having to deal with overt and covert types of racism. They were talking about like racist incidents on campus, within the fraternity and sorority system. And university, of course, kind of did what universities do. They pretty much kind of poo-pooed it. Not really, but in an official manner, but one of those pro forma types of responses where they said, well, we will continue the conversation. We'll do some investigation. And it felt like the university was actually gaslighting them, right? So when the OU Unheard gets this actual recording, they go, aha, here's concrete evidence that what we're talking about is real. So what do they decide to do? They decide, well, like most students, they decide to amplify it. And so they send it out to the media. They send it out to the New York Times. They send it out to the Los Angeles Times. They sent it out to Fox News. Fox News even said that this was racist. And if you can get Fox News to say something is racist, you have overcome a very high bar. But of course, like most organizations, Sigma Alpha Epsilon is not dumb. They bring out their PR guy, and I felt sorry for him because he had an impossible task. And he goes out there and he says, we find this to be abhorrent. We find that this singing of the song to be abhorrent doesn't match the values of Sigma Alpha Epsilon, and we just want to emphasize that this is really just about two guys in one chapter. And we really think it's time to move forward because we're going to deal with those two guys in that one chapter. But the problem is that as people, students, particularly within the Big 12 conference, Kansas State, Texas Tech, University of Texas, began hearing the song, they began saying, it's not just two guys in one chapter. I've heard it at my school. I've heard this as a common thing. So Sigma Alpha Epsilon comes back and they say, oh, what we'll do is we'll do a full investigation. So Sigma Alpha Epsilon does a 6-week investigation and then holds a second a press conference, this time with their president of the time. They both don't look too happy. And what they decide to do is they say, well, through our investigation, we found that what it wasn't just two people in one chapter. Instead, during our college brother retreat, it was 5 or 6 chapters teaching it to themselves after all the official duties. They made note to emphasize that we didn't have anything to do with this. This was just our fraternity members doing this outside of the official duties. But then they kept coming back by saying, despite the fact that we've gone from 2 members in one chapter to 5 or 6 different chapters teaching it to each other, they still want to emphasize the fact that they did not believe that they actually had an issue when it came to race. Now that, again, none of that is anything unusual. It is pro forma for institutions and organizations, particularly within IFC and Panhellenic, right? But there's a little thing that happens when those incidents actually go beyond the fraternity and sorority space. What typically happens is that the media gets involved, the general public gets involved. They're just shocked that you could actually have these 2 white 19-year-olds singing about lynching African Americans from a tree. They want an explanation. And it's very hard for them to actually believe that these 2 white 19-year-olds who typically look a little bit like their kids could actually sing something so odious. They like to think that basically whatever made them sing this song came from the outside. And so what we have is sort of a natural belief system in these white kids. We give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, that's direct opposite what we do when it comes to students of color. If they're Black and Latinx, we typically look at it from the standpoint of saying, well, whatever the thing that they did, we should believe that first. And then we have to try to rehabilitate who and what they are. And a lot of times we will ascribe all the pathologies of where they've grown up or, whether or not their family system, all of those things as being contributing factors to behavior that we believe to be natural to who they are. So we will say, oh, whether he grew up in a Black inner city, in a single mom, and that really kind of says that, they don't have the discipline. And this is the reason why we need this and that and these solutions. And it's only when we rehabilitate them by saying, well, wait a second, this kid is an Eagle Scout or this kid is a triple straight A students, do they become human? So what happens with these 2 white 19-year-old students is that we look at them as human and we figure there's something from the outside that contributed to their singing at this one point in time, singing this abhorrent song. So what in this particular case, what was it about Parker Rice and Levi Pettit? Well, Levi Pettit, after it gets out, he decides he's going to host a press conference, and he brings every single Black person he ever knew to stand behind him. One actually literally was rubbing his shoulders to show sympathy. And Levi Pettit comes and says, well, I never believe that I see myself as a racist. Well, here's the thing. Racists never see themselves as racist. No one ever, you can even get neo-Nazis and right-wing white supremacists who will tell you they're not racist. They're doing something for freedom or something else. And what also happens within the subset of particularly with white students or white people in general, is that racist is someone over there. Pick a southern state you don't like. Racists are over in Mississippi or Alabama. or they're rednecks or hillbillies or quote unquote white trash. They're those people who are uneducated, and those are the people who are racist. Or oftentimes the racism has to be so demonstrative, meaning, as my wife likes to joke, the only person that can actually be a racist is the person who kills someone in the civil rights movement. That is a demonstrable racist, but no one else can be really racist, right? We give them the benefit of the doubt. Or we have things from the exterior like alcohol. Parker Rice said the reason why he sang the song is because he was under the influence of alcohol. Although, millions of people every day drink and get drunk, actually, and never sing a song like that. But that's what he decided to do. But the biggest thing we do every time we have a campus racism incident is we infantile them. Now, why do we do that? Well, this is at Colorado State, and this is right before the pandemic. I think about 2020-ish, right around there. And at Colorado State, you're going to see blackface all through my presentation. And they're, Wakanda forever, and they put blackface on. Now, okay, this is kind of standard issue, kind of campus racism, what you see. But how does the media report it? Well, the media reports it by calling them boys, right? Now, highlight that really, really put it in highlights, because about 5 or 6 hours later, they had to change that to men. Now, why do they say boys, though? The reason why they say boys is because if I can convince you that these are not adults, but children, well, then they can't really be held responsible for being mature enough to understand the ramifications of their behavior. And so I can give you sympathy. I can create this notion that they don't understand what racism is, because they're just kids. They're just boys. They're just girls. And this is not just when we talk about campus racism. The Olympics are going on now. I know it's the Winter Olympics, but the Olympics are going on. How many of you all remember Ryan Lochte in 2016, Olympic swimmer? He goes to Brazil, goes into a gas station in Brazil and just tears it apart, right? So what was when the next morning, like the Today shows and all the morning shows, they have all his friends up there giving an explanation, kind of a character witness about him. What's the one thing that they actually said? Well, Ryan is just a kid. Ryan was 32 years old. And yet they still were using the whole he's just a kid type of excuse. But my favorite excuse when it came to Parker Rice and Levi Pettit, two white 19-year-olds at the University of Oklahoma, singing about lynching African Americans from a tree, centered around the one person that I swear to God, I don't even need to see y'all to know that you all, basically, 99% of us have come up with the exact same person when we think about who was the person who influenced them the most to sing about lynching Black people from trees. And I would bet my whole bank account that we're all going to say this person, and this person right here is Waka Flocka Flame. Wait a second. I can't even see all y'all, but I'm pretty sure y'all weren't thinking Waka Flocka Flame. Let me explain. All right. So Waka was supposed to appear at the IFC fraternity house at the University of Oklahoma. And he sees the video and he says, wait a second, I'm canceling. I'm not going to, reward this fraternity with a performance after seeing this. This is racist. Now, that was a bridge too far for this guy. Joe Scarborough of Morning Joe, still on the air right now, right? And he said, aha, yeah, this is the reason. This is the reason why they're saying this. Kids, meaning really white kids, that are buying hip hop and gangster rap, they hear the word nigger over and over, and that's the reason why they decide they're going to use, sing song like this, right? Now, I, in my younger days, used to be the editor of a hip hop magazine. And I will tell you this, if you are in 2015, even just 7 years ago, still using the term gangster rap, I'm going to assume that you don't know what the hell you're talking about, right? But really what he's basically saying is that the hip hop culture in particular is the reason why white kids are doing racist things. All right. Now, there are a lot of things that you can blame Waka for in terms of music and, cryptocurrency and a bunch of different things. You can blame him for literally looking like me. If you want to do that, cool. All right, that's fine. But blaming him or hip hop in general for having two white 19-year-olds sing about lynching Black people from a tree seems to be absurd. But let's go with it. Let's say that hip hop and Waka Flocka Flame are the reasons that two white 19-year-olds at the University of Oklahoma decided that they were going to sing about lynching African Americans from a tree. If that's the case, what about these guys? This is Tau Kappa Epsilon at Cal State Long Beach in 1963. And in 1963, Cal State Long Beach decided to suspend them because they sang this song. Bye bye, Black boy, you better play it cool or else we'll bomb your Sunday school. And they were talking about the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, where 4 little Black girls were murdered by the KKK. Now, is this a coincidence, or is it just anecdotal? Or is this part of a systemic campus racism that we rarely talk about and we've basically hidden within our organizations and institutions? That's what we're going to talk about this evening. But first, I just want to say, even though I can't see you, good evening, everyone. And I want to say thank you so much for bringing me here. One of the reasons why I was kind of particularly thrilled by being asked to do this is because Sigma Delta Tau is founded at Cornell University in the exact same place as my beloved Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And I will be going to Cornell for the very first time in 22 years this weekend. So I was kind of like, it's all coming together. It's all coming together. And secondarily, I was excited because I know just like Alpha Phi Alpha is historically African-American fraternity, Sigma Delta Tau is a historically Jewish sorority. And of course, we both invite and welcome everyone in, but it's from what our roots are. And I think it's one of those things that when I talk about campus racism, it's sometimes important for us to be aware of kind of all the things that are out there in particular, because we can get very, very comfortable. I always talk about this with Alpha Phi Alpha is that oftentimes I always joke because Martin Luther King is a member of Alpha Phi Alpha that we consider ourselves to be mini Martin Luther Kings. But we can't go out there for just civil rights justice and not understand misogyny and sexism. Right? So we have to educate ourselves on the various issues. And that's the exact same thing when we're talking about African-American fraternities and sororities, understanding anti-Semitism. And the exact same thing when we talk about traditionally or historic Jewish fraternities and sororities, understanding racism. Because a lot of times we can make assumptions that we're very comfortable with, and they are absolutely wrong. But who actually talks about the issues of campus racism when we talk about K-12 getting our kids to a college campus? Really, we don't. When we are, in K-12 or we're parents of K-12, children, what we often are doing is that we're always encouraging them to go to that special place, that place that's going to be wonderful, that's going to transform you, which is a college campus, right? It's almost like we create this educational Disneyland, a utopia, where everyone, it doesn't matter where you're from, you all become USC Trojans or University of Maryland Terrapins or Golden Bears. Doesn't matter where you all come from, you just come to that place, and it can be from Oakland or Los Angeles. It doesn't matter where you are. It's a place that is not kind of sullied by the real world. But in reality, it is the real world. It's not just some utopia where just because you don't, or some of us don't have a mortgage, you don't have the things of real life. No, the real world is always on our campuses, and sometimes we forget that. Let me give you some examples of what's happening on college campuses over the last couple of years. Just about the end of 2021, a Stanford student was angry at Black members of the Student Government Association, and he decided that he was going to create these characters, these racist caricatures of these members, and pass them off as flyers. Last year. And I'm always amazed that all this happened during the pandemic. I was like, wow, we can do racism during a pandemic. We're pretty multifaceted. This member of Alpha Delta Pi, 80 Pi, came up with a presentation where she had to describe unattractive and attractive features in people. And it just so happened that the unattractive people were all Black, all Black. HBCUs, I don't know if you've been noticing in the news, dozens of HBCUs have been getting bomb threats over the last about 2 weeks or so. Now, this is also reminiscent of what happened during the Civil Rights Movement. This is the exact same thing that happened during the Civil Rights Movement. Bomb threats would be called in on a regular basis. But back to Panel Nick and IFC, 80 Pi, Alpha Phi. I remember this happened at George Washington right on February 1st. I couldn't believe we were going to start off Black History Month like this, but that's how we were. One member is holding up a banana peel, and she says in the caption, "Izzy, I'm 1/16 Black." And what is she trying to say? She's trying to say that Black people are not human, that we're monkeys. Abilene Christian University, this woman was running up and down the corridors of the dorms talking about that this is why Black Lives Matter. Oklahoma State, when he says he only likes Black girls. Franklin and Marshall, with two students who decided that they were going to dress up as a Mexican and as a Chinese person. And you see his hands by his eyes because he's trying to create, quote unquote, the folds of Asian eyes. Quinnipiac University, Black Lives Matter. University of North Dakota, lock that black bitch out. Now, of course, you think right there, you're like, okay, this is not good. You know, this is pretty racist. 3 days later at the University of North Dakota, blackface. Now, to be honest, the very first thing I was surprised about was that there were black people at the University of North Dakota. I didn't know. 350 something black people at the University of North Dakota. But would I send someone that I love there? No, not really. Now, this guy has nothing to do with my lecture. He just looks like your typical college president. I just wanted to have him because he's kind of representative of a lot of times higher education, and in particular, high officers within our organizations. And I want to go back to a study that happened in 2015. Inside Higher Education did a longitudinal study about the racial climate on college campuses. And they asked about 700, I think 600, 700 different college campuses about the climate on their campus. And they asked them four different categories. Was it poor, fair, good, or excellent? Just very simple, right? 81% of the people who responded, or the presidents who responded, said that it was either good or excellent, right? Okay, you know, they did pretty all right. How do they look at other people? How do they look at other campuses? Well, it was pretty 50-50, right? 43% thought it was good or excellent, right? I'm not surprised by those numbers. But between 2015 and 2016, there were approximately 300 campus racist incidents and protests sweeping across the campus, across the country. They were saying they were spreading like wildfire. And it didn't have a geographic center. You had the University of Missouri, where they were able to protest to get rid of the president and the chancellor successfully. Tufts University happened, a very polite, protestations at Ivy Leagues. And then at my university, my alma mater, the University of California, Berkeley, where I readily admit that we do protest Tuesday for not being Thursday, we do protest very, very well. And it was happening there too. So you have all of these protests happening. You have this understanding that campus racism is a thing. And you also have this SAE issue popping up. So I told you this is a longitudinal study, right? They go back to the presidents and they ask, what are the results? What are your feelings now, 1 year later? Are the relations poor, fair, good, or excellent? Now you would normally, SDT, you would normally think, well, wait a second. The number of good and excellence have to come down, right? Because it's been every campus being affected. You all would be wrong. The number of good and excellence went actually up. So basically how they looked at themselves, they said, oh no, we're doing perfectly fine. But the number that went drastically down was how they viewed everyone else. And they went from 43% to 24% doing good or excellent in terms of how they saw everybody. So basically what happens with our institutions and our organizations is that we always myopically think that we're doing fine. That racist incident that occurred was over there. That is not our problem. We're fine. We're ahead of this game. And in reality, most of our organizations and most of our college presidents, or where we're talking about our organizational heads, institutional heads, are reactive to things instead of being proactive, which is the reason why I'm very excited about the events like this. This is a proactive type of event, is to be able to give education to your members. But there was one thing I noticed, and I studied college campus racism from 1946 all the way up to 2015. And I've continued on, but officially for the book, is that the reactions to campus racism were almost always the exact same. It did not matter what the year or the decade. In fact, I remember one particular blackface incident that happened at Temple University, like in the early 1990s, and the 10 years later, it happened in the 2000s, and the response was the exact same. And it's something that I try to codify as something that I call 3 eyes equals a miss. And it was very simple in terms of the reaction from institutions and organizations. And the first thing to do was to individualize it. This is just 2 people in 1 chapter. Stop looking deeper. We want to minimize the actual impact to the organization or institution. So what we typically do is we send out a nice press release that says that this does not match the values and principles and ideals of our XYZ institution, right? Even though it might. We don't know because we haven't looked. And particularly when we talk about IFC and Panalytic, we don't look. I mean, until recently, most IFC and Panalytic organizations didn't collect data on demographics or racial demographics. And then we trivialize it. We look at it from the standpoint of like, oh, it's Waka's fault, right? It's hip hop's fault. It's social media. You throw those things out as being excuses. Or what I like to say oftentimes is what I call the First Amendment dodge. Now, I want to make sure you all understand. I'm a writer. I love the First Amendment. My University of California, Berkeley is home to the free speech movement. You're never going to get me to go against the First Amendment. And if you notice, one of the things that I do is that I don't use euphemisms. I don't use euphemisms like the N-word and the like. I use the word in the context in which it was used in order for you to understand the gravity and weight of the degradation that it was trying to impose upon the particular group. In particular, me, my family, my community, and so on and so forth. Hiding that through euphemisms does no one any good. So I believe in the First Amendment. But a lot of times what happens when these campus racism incidents occur is that, someone will come in and immediately turn the focus away from the group that has been targeted by the speech and toward the idea of free speech. No one is trying to abridge anyone's free speech. What we are really trying to do is say, now focus on the people that they're targeting with that speech. And what happens is that year after year this occurs, what happens is institutions tend to dismiss the concerns of minority students. So we get to the point where we almost believe that minority students have an obligation to protest on college campuses, as though that's part of what their natural DNA should be. And in reality, students of color don't want to come to campus having to protest every year. I had a young woman who came to a young Black woman at Ohio State, and she talked about the fact that she was an electrical engineer. And she was like, I came here for electrical engineering. I didn't come here to minor in protest, but I'll protest for my humanity. And yet what we do is we assume that the organization or the institution is dysfunctional, and the people who have the responsibility of bringing that up are the people who are being targeted. But it's not really kind of hard to understand why we're in this situation. Americans are ignorant about racism on purpose. Yeah, we're seeing this literally happen in real time. We're seeing this happen every single day as people throw out kind of red meat to people who don't want to talk about race. I like to use this particular kind of easy to understand way of seeing how we kind of hide race and decide we don't want to talk about race on a very honest nature. The state of Texas school board, basically the state of Texas buys more books than anywhere in the country. And so school textbook makers have to kind of go with whatever their curriculum is to distribute it. They're not going to make a Rhode Island special edition. They're going to make the Texas special edition and send it out. And so what they basically say is that, the words matter. And within this, they say, well, when we talk about the Atlantic slave trade, they brought millions of workers, to this country. And no, my family weren't just workers, right? My family, which is, in Texas, from Texas, did not come here as just people who clocked in and clocked out as though they were free. No. They were slaves. And it's important for us to make sure that we talk about this. So in order to do this, I want you to all take this little quick quiz. And we can still do this on Zoom, all right? We're going to take a racism reality quiz, all right? Okay? It's going to be easy to do. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to think about really, really hard. Do you know which race or ethnicity you are? Okay? Do you? All right? Now, I know I'm Black, all right? And a lot of times if we were doing this in person, I would ask, where are my Black folks at? And they would raise hell because they raise their hands and everything else like that. And I would go through everyone else, right? But what happens oftentimes is that we say to ourselves, well, I don't see race. Okay, well, that's fine. But do you know who you are, right? And can you tell, and point to others of other races and ethnicity? Now, I'm pretty sure you can. You can't see everyone in Zoom, I'm pretty sure right there, but you all saw me. And not one of you at this point in time said, I never noticed that he was Black. Of course you did. I want you to, right? Now, if you know who you are and you can recognize a person like me as being Black, then you're not colorblind. And I don't want you to be colorblind. I don't want you to be colorblind. I want you to be able to see all the characteristics, me as an individual, me as part of a group, me as part of a movement in this quilt called America. I want you to see all parts of who and what I am. If I'm an African-American woman, I want you to see me as who I am. If I'm a Latinx member of the LGBTQ community, I want you to see my sexual orientation and my ethnicity. I want you to see everything, because what I bring to this, this program and to this lecture and to what I bring to the society is a culmination of not just who I am in terms of my individual characteristics, but I'm also a part of communities. I'm a reflection of America. I'm a reflection of the things that are great about America. I'm a reflection about the things that are not so great about America. I'm a reflection of things that are systemic. I'm a reflection of things that are broken down and have been deconstructed. You must understand those things. Because oftentimes when we talk about race, we know that race is a biological nothing. That is quite true. Race is a biological nothing. We've been creating races from place to place for the millennium, right? But the fact that race is a biological nothing doesn't mean that it's not a sociological everything in this particular country, right? A lot of times I'll get some students in the Q&A, they'll say, well, wait a second, race is just a social construct. And they are right. Race is a social construct, but they say it like they're trying to say that it's not important. Do you know what else is a social construct? Money. Money is a social construct. I have yet to find any student willing to give me all their non-important social construct money. They really know how important it is then. But then again, when we talk about race, like I said, it's really a nothing. This is my racial makeup. Native American, I'm one of those Black people who does have Native American in him. South Asian, Southeast Asian, Central and South African, Scandinavian. I bet you all didn't have Scandinavian on your Lawrence Ross bingo card for DNA, but I do. North African, British and Irish, probably in the same place where that Scandinavian came from, and West African. I am literally everyone on this call, right? But when we talk about race as a sociological something, we don't go, oh, you're Native American and South. No, I'm Black, right? This is who I am. This is how I present myself to the world, okay? But when we talk about race, particularly within our own organizations, within Panhellenic and IFC in particular, what I found is that we have two different groups of people, those who are race averse and those who are race aware, right? Now, this is a broad generalization. I will give you the caveat that this is a broad generalization, but kind of holds true. Race averse people are those typically white folks who don't really want to talk about race. Even on the most benign side, if they could stop talking about race as soon as possible, even if I agree with these things, I know what to talk about, I believe in diversity, equity, inclusion, but I really don't feel like talking about this over the table with Uncle Jim, who doesn't like, Black people or Latinx people or Asians and so on and so forth, right? Or on the side of the people who really just on the nefarious side, just basically just don't like people of color at all. They usually are, when we talk about race averse, don't want to talk about it. So they'll say race card, and you're pulling out the race card. Those are kind of like your red flags that a person is race averse. Oftentimes, even on the benign side, particularly within institutions, what we will do is we will overestimate the racial diversity in our circles and the spaces. So oftentimes, you will have, say, for example, on a college campus, an engineering department where you have, let's just make it stereotypical, 100 white men and 25 people of color of various people of color. And people will say that that's diverse, or maybe even less, 15. And then by gender, it's even less because we basically just throw in the towel with STEM with little girls in elementary school and things like that. So we don't have that type of diversity all the way through, but we will highlight those who are actually the diverse part of an overwhelmingly non-diverse department, right? Race aware folks typically are people of color, right? They will walk into every space and immediately understand where they stand in that space, right? If they're walking on campus and they come into a classroom, excuse me, for the very first time, they'll scan the classroom, look for other people of color and go, hey, that's weird. We're going to get together, right? If they're Panhellenic or IFC and they're going to a national conference, they're gonna, hey, they're hugging everybody, but they're still looking out for all their homegirls, of color, and their homeboys of color within IFC and Pan Up, right? So you have these two visions of the world, right? Two different visions of the world. Now, I'd never go to the websites of any place I speak, but SDT, I've not been to your website. But I bet you, if I dig in your website, it would look a little bit like this. It would be kind of a multicultural website, right? You got 2 white people, 2 black people, Latina, Asian guy, it could be Hawaiian, it could be Filipino, anything, right? And it's one of those things that you almost always see on university websites. It's kind of a projection of the diversity that people want, but may not be reflective on a college campus. So for example, my alma mater, University of California, Berkeley, it's 3% black people. And yet, if you go to the University of California, Berkeley website, it looks like this, 38%. And so one is looking upon a reality that does not necessarily exist. But for the race-aware students or the race-aware members of your organization, how do they see the same organization? Well, they typically are this guy. They're the black guy. And they've been invited to the party, but they're not necessarily connecting with people, right? And so we always have to be cognizant about how do we make people actually move those realities together? How do we actually make the things that we want to project out actually look and feel real to those people who are in the organizations, who are the people of color within the organizations? Now, let's get to the roots of this matter. Now, I just use this because I just love the roots and I thought that was pretty clever. I hope you love it. What does America believe is part of its foundation? Okay. Is it freedom and democracy? Yes, I think it's freedom and democracy. I think some of us, have always had to struggle to find our way within the idea of freedom and democracy, whether or not it's by color, ethnicity, immigration, sexual orientation, gender. We've all had to find ourselves and fight in order to find ourselves within the fabric of freedom and democracy. But yeah, we believe it. We believe in it. Is it free market capitalism? Yeah, I guess so. My conservative friends would go, yeah, and low taxes too. Okay, throw that in. That's fine. Okay, great. Or is one of the foundations of this country what we all basically know and love? Beyonce. I'm pretty sure it's Beyonce. But one of the things that we always have had to fight in this country is this pseudo philosophy of white supremacy. Now, when I say white supremacy, I'm not talking about white supremacists, right? I'm not talking about the neo-Nazi with the tattoo of the swastika or the Ku Klux Klan member with the hood over his face or the Proud Boys and all those Oath Keepers and all the rest of those people. I'm talking about these actual pseudoscience, the pseudo race science that basically says that, to break it all down, whiteness is the default normal, in this society. They are the ones who define humanity. And everyone else is on the other side and having to basically prove their humanity, maybe proving their humanity through struggle, through proving their humanity through access, proving that they're quote unquote just as good once given access. All those things are how we normally assume this particular world. And freedom and democracy is designed to counteract that, right? Now, I want to give a trigger warning for all my folks, all my folks who identified as white on this call. I want you to be cool. I am not saying that you're a white supremacist at all. I'm not saying any of that. I am just saying that when we talk about the society fights and deals with white supremacy. In the same way, I can say that this society deals with misogyny. It's not hard for me to actually say that. And a lot of times what will happen is that white students and white members of IFC Panhellenic will come up to me and say, well, I just don't see it. So therefore, it doesn't exist. And my thing is like, okay, let me give you this example of how we can do it, but we're going to change it to gender. Let's say that this lecture was in an auditorium, right? And it's nighttime, right? Now, at the end of the lecture, 90% of the men, just making some assumptions, but majority of the men would walk out on campus and go wherever they were going to go, feeling completely safe on campus. Women, on the other hand, would have to actually do a number of different things. They'd have to figure out basically what is the layout of the campus and where am I going? Where are the historically dangerous places on campus? Do I go in a group or do I call ahead to let people know where I'm going? You have to do all of those different things because the world, when it comes to women and women's safety, is very different than when it comes to men. And so as a man, I can sit back and say, oh, I don't see all that danger and try to deny the idea that it exists. And yet it still exists. One world, two different realities. And oftentimes what happens is that when we get siloed and we don't see those realities, particularly amongst when we talk about race and racism, what happens is that people then kind of go, well, you're gonna have to prove this to me. Okay, well, I'll prove it to you then. All right, but don't believe me. I'm just a Los Angeles Times bestselling author. Believe people like Thomas Jefferson, right? Thomas Jefferson, a leading light of the Enlightenment. I mean, one of the smartest human beings that has ever lived. He was a pretty bad a businessman and of course a slaveholder, but we're going to ignore that part. He was a leading thinker. He was a scientist to his core. And he believed in the pseudoscience of white supremacy, basically thinking that there was a difference between blacks and whites in terms of body and mind. Okay, how about Abraham Lincoln? Now, I say this with a caveat. Of all of the people that I could pick, Abraham Lincoln is by far not the most, racist or white supremacist person, right? He was basically a politician when he said this. He was in a white supremacist society, but he did say it. In 1858, and during the Lincoln-Douglas debates, Abraham Lincoln said basically he would assign this superior position in a society of, black and white, free blacks, of course, to the white man, right? But he's, like I said, he's not the most racist. The most racist is a man named John C. Calhoun. If you want to go look him up, he's a ball of wax. But these are the types of things when we talk about white supremacy and white supremacist society, these are things that have always been in our society and freedom and democracy, because all during this time, you have people of all colors fighting against this idea. This is not just a black struggle. It's not just a Latinx struggle or Asian American Pacific Islander struggle. This has always been a multiracial, multi-ethnic struggle. But from white supremacy, you also then get public policy, whether or not you're talking about slavery or segregation, Jim Crow segregation, de jure or de facto. You get things like the 1882 Chinese Exclusionary Act, which is really kind of echoes even to this day, kind of this notion of this ethnic being the danger. Is something that we deal with when we talk about immigration to this day. And then from there, we get systemic and individual racism, right? And this in particular deals with the idea of racism on college campuses. Now, before some of you all get mad and say, why is Trump on here and blah, 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 I don't care really about the whole Trump politics. I'm more interested in what he said. Keep the politics aside, what he said as an example. So the first thing is like dealing with racism on college campuses is the idea of difference, intellectual difference based upon racial identity. So a classic case is The Bell Curve by Charles Murray that came out about 30 years ago. This notion that, whites and Asians, because they do better on standardized tests, are intellectually superior to Latinx and Black high school students. And it's kind of the same sophistry that you find with IQ tests. And it kind of whittles down all into eugenics and this kind of racist notion of a difference based upon race and ethnicity. It's all circular logic science, pseudoscience, I should say. The next one is superiority. And what I'm taking from Trump is this, what he was alleged to have said about countries run by black people. Said every country run by, I'm paraphrasing, every country that is run by black people is a shithole country. As though whiteness gives you some superiority, some knowledge about how to run countries that black people can't possibly have. And then the last one is the thing that we always see within organizations and chapters, which is dominance. And dominance, when I talk about dominance, I'm talking about dominance of the space. Meaning that if you have a chapter in which you have 100 women and you have, for example, 10 people of color within that, the 90% void the void in that allows for a vacuum to be filled by people who want to act in a racist manner and also believe that they will be supported by a large part of the community, by the chapter community. What do I mean by that? Here are some examples. Here's a member of I forgot the name. They lucked out. I completely forgot this already. At the University of Michigan, two members at the University of Michigan, and she said, and I'll never forget, she said that she was the least racist person that you would ever meet. And I used to think to myself, if you're the least racist person, who's the most racist person? Central Michigan college Republicans, racism and anti-Semitism are kissing cousins. A couple of years ago, they decided that they were going to pass out Valentines, one of which said that my love for you burns like 6,000 Jews. University of Tennessee, you have Black Lives Matter as the hashtag, and let's go, I'm Black. Boston College, I like my steak and cheese like I like my slaves. Tau Kappa Epsilon, Florida International University, a member of the TEEX decided to do a screenshot of a Snapchat where they had a quote unquote joke of a pile of ashes talking about Jewish girls. That lecture, by the way, I actually brought this to that lecture, and a member of Tau Kappa Epsilon who didn't attend the lecture came rushing to me after the lecture talking about, could I take it down? I'm just like, no, this is what you did. So we're going to talk about this in 4 different ways. We're going to talk about it in 4 different ways because it's important for you not to just think this is individuals. Racism is not just simply individuals acting badly. It comes from a system. When we talk about system, it comes from a number of things, particularly when we talk about campus racism. And the first thing we should talk about is the separate and unequal educational system. But campus racism isn't new. It literally is not new. This is Kappa Alpha Nu. We're just going to look at it from the fraternal aspect. Kappa Alpha Nu at Indiana University. Kappa Alpha Nu, founded in 1911 by 10 Black men. They had been denied service in Bloomington, Indiana. They were sometimes segregated from white students at the library and classrooms. So they formed a support group, just like everyone, right? Form a support group, it thrives, it spreads throughout the country. But they decide that they have to change their name 4 years later because white students are calling them by the slur Kappa Alpha Nig. So they change their name to what we know them now as Kappa Alpha Psi. But minority students, BIPOC students in particular, have been going on college campuses for, the early parts of the 1800s. But it really kind of began really trying to get accelerating on college campuses during the Civil Rights Movement. And it really kind of came to a standpoint in 1963. The same time the Teeks were singing about lynching, we're talking about bombing little Black girls. And this is kind of a metaphor for when we talk about white supremacy versus freedom and democracy. This is at the University of Alabama, and you have George Wallace, the governor of University of Alabama, the infamous segregationist governor who famously said, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And he was bound and determined to make sure that the University of Alabama was not integrated with 5 African Americans, even though there was a court order. So what happens is he stands in the schoolhouse door, he makes a scan of the schoolhouse door, and a Department of Justice official with a court order orders him to move aside. And this is what we know about America. This is the redemptive nature of America. The redemptive nature of America is that when we talk about white supremacy doesn't win. It wins short-term battles, but it never wins the war. And honestly, the war is not over. But it wins important battles, but we always have to deconstruct it, and we expand. We expand freedom and democracy in the exact same way that George Wallace eventually moved aside. Now, did that mean that University of Alabama was not racist the minute that that Black students were enrolled? Of course not. It mean that the city of Tuscaloosa wasn't racist? No. Did it mean that the state of Alabama or the United States was not racist? Of course not. Deconstructing things and tearing parts of it down does not mean that suddenly the thing has gone away. We're just simply reducing the magnitude of that malignancy, right? Which is the societal malignancy. So you can't have a policy, and particularly when we talk about racism, and not basically deal with it with a counter policy. And the counter policy, not saying it was perfect, but the counter policy was affirmative action. Now, affirmative action used to be a bipartisan type of policy. John F. Kennedy talked about it as president. Lyndon Baines Johnson talked about it in 1966 at Howard University. Richard Nixon, no one's liberal, was a Republican who basically used affirmative action to create a Black middle class in the 1970s through the hiring through the civil service and through the federal government, right? So it was a very important policy that basically only did one thing. It said that we recognize that we have intentionally, not just as a person or culturally, but intentionally from governmental policies to institutions to close off areas of society to create a second-class citizenship. What we want to do is we want to recognize those things. We want to open the door wider. That's it. Open the door wider. So at Berkeley, we're taking everybody at 1,600 on the SAT. Now we're taking inner city kids at 1,500. Believe me, there's no difference between a 1,500 and a 1,600 kid at Berkeley. In fact, there's no difference between a 1,200 kid and a 1,600 scoring kid at Berkeley, right? But there's the pushback. And the pushback, particularly at Berkeley, occurred when the people against affirmative action began creating things that they call these affirmative action bake sales. And affirmative action bake sales were supposed to be a metaphor for affirmative action. And basically saying that, well, students of color get these preferential treatment, and we would never allow a bakery to sell items to different people based upon different metrics, right? And usually it goes kind of gender, and then it goes up the ranks of ethnicities and races. And so 25 cents off for any woman. Native Americans, they only have to pay 25 cents. I guess if you're a Native American woman, you get everything for free. I don't know. Black and African American pay 75 cents. Latino, $1. Asian American, $1.50. The default normal, white, Caucasian, $2. And usually they'll push out some 19-year-old student who has a Wikipedia understanding of Martin Luther King, and he'll sit up and say, well, Martin Luther King believed in the content of a color character versus the color of one's skin, and this is unfair that you can just get into Berkeley by just being Black. And to that I say, wait, you mean I could have got in Berkeley without studying, and I just could have walked up to the registrar and said, I'm Black? I would have happily taken that route versus all the hard work that I did. But what those students don't talk about is that educational disparities are baked into society. Now, what does all this have to do with campus racism? I'm going to show you, right? So what happens is that this is redlining. I'm going to assume that all of you understand the concept of redlining. The concept of redlining is not just prejudice or racist realtors, which was true, but not just racist or prejudiced realtors or bankers who wouldn't lend to Black people because they didn't like Black people. It was from the federal government. Most of us will purchase our first home or did purchase our first home through an FHA loan. The FHA system was designed in the 1930s to encourage Americans to purchase homes. But the one thing they said is that we need to see the districts and the areas that you're going to be selling these mortgages to, and if they are too heavily Black or too heavily Black and Latinx, well, we consider those to be high risk. And if they're high risk, then we won't actually sell mortgages or approve mortgages for those areas. So what that does is if you've ever wondered why there are inner cities, that's the reason why we have inner cities. People and communities move and change, and there's population that change. But this is Los Angeles right here. You can see, if you watch the Super Bowl, this is the Super Bowl in terms of what they were talking about. This is South Central Los Angeles, all that yellow and red. And it's kind of still the same way now, even though gentrification is occurring. Now, some of this would happen overtly, right? There was this notion that white neighborhoods had inherently more value. So your house was more valuable because it was centered around white people. If you were in a Black and brown neighborhood, you were in renters. You had land places where more people rented, or even the homes. If they were even the identical homes, were of less value because the people who were living in it were not white; they were Black or brown, right? And when we talk about, say, for example, school districts around this country, basically, the share of white kids attending majority white schools is enormous. Now, I kind of hate this map for two reasons, because it's a little outdated and it's a lot of land in that, because it kind of throws you off. But it kind of is trying to put the impact of that when we talk about, it's like predominantly, like I think about 60 to 80% of white students go to majority white schools. How are K-12 schools funded around this country? Most of them by property tax. And so what happens oftentimes is that we know, this is a much more current stat, 80% of Latinx kids, of Latinx students from K to 12 go to a segregated school, and 74% of Black students go to a segregated school. What's even more important, 43% of Latinx students go to intensely segregated schools. Those are segregated schools where less than 10% of the student body population is white. And 38% of Black students go to intensely segregated schools. Now, what does that mean? Well, there's nothing inherently inferior about going to a Black or brown school. There's nothing inherently inferior about that. But there is inferiority when we come to budget. There's a 10% decrease in the for every 10% increase in the minorities at a school, there's a $75 decrease per student in the money spent, which means that when you take school districts of this exact same size, non-white school districts have a $23 billion gap. Now, when you have a $23 billion gap in an inner city school versus a predominantly white school, and I'm not talking about a rich predominantly white school, I'm talking about just a regular middle income white school, right? Majority white school. How many AP courses are happening at the inner city school versus over at the majority white school? It's going to be a disparity. Now, if you knew this, and if Americans weren't kind of ignorant about race and racism, you would think that when minority students get on college campuses, they would actually be seen by white students as being like, wow, you overcame all of that. I'm interested in your how you were able to do this. Now, this is not universal for every student. I came from one of the oldest Catholic high schools in Los Angeles, right? So it's all different in terms of how we see this. But white students basically looked at minorities in a very different way, right? Baylor did a study in 2016. They asked them, how do you see BIPOC students? And they said, well, Black and Latinx students don't work hard enough. Remember that menu? 75 cents and $1. Asian students are cold but competent. That was kind of like right underneath white students, and they considered themselves to be the metric for all of this. If you don't believe that students of color belong on campus, they don't also look like they belong in your spaces, and you will do what you can to denigrate them because you don't respect them. Here's right before the pandemic. We see this all the time. Right before the pandemic, 2 Native American high school students were on a bus. One of those high school orientation for seniors, the most common thing that you can do your senior year, to just tour Colorado State, right? And a white parent called the police on them because she did not believe that they were actually high school students. The irony of ironies is that Colorado State is located on Native American land. Then you have a Black graduate student had the police called on her because a white graduate student who had done this at least 3 other times had called the police on her because the Black graduate student was doing the most college-y thing on the face of this earth, which is to sleep in the college area, the common area. I can tell you between classes. I can't tell you how many times I did that, right? I was just glad somebody woke me up between classes, right? Oh no, she had the police come and demanded that she actually show her ID and prove that she lived in the dorms by using her key card. Or you have this member of Kappa Alpha Psi at Ball State in 2020. He sat down, got in his seat, got there early, put all of his stuff together, put all of his plugs all in, and the professor told him he needed to move. The student was like, why? And he was like, I don't want you sitting right there. I'm gonna have you sit over here. And he said, no, I'm not moving. He called the police. He then decided to take a sabbatical, which was a good thing. And then here's the most curious one of all for me. A few years back, a Latina was accused of plagiarism at Sulphur University because she had the audacity to use the word hence in her essay. And the professor said, that's not your word. And I was like, when did hence become the line of demarcation for a Latina knowing, whether or not she was ESP, English as a ESL, English as a second language or not? When did that become the line of demarcation? But if I'm a Latina in school, do I actually believe that I'm going to get a fair shake academically from that professor? No. And it breaks your trust. And a lot of times, a lot of students are having their trust broken. And so what you'll see are in social media in particular, types of protests like this one, the Being Black at the University of Michigan, which was one of the earliest ones, where students talk about things like, you just can't call things diverse by putting faces on things, on pamphlets. Or the Black Bruins at UCLA. The Black Bruins at UCLA talked about the fact that, there were more championship banners than Black men coming into UCLA on a campus of 40,000. I think at the time, the banners were about 120 championship banners and less than 100 Black men. And then we also see some of the marginalization. Marginalization. And a lot of times this occurs, excuse me, within Panhellenic and IFC. And I see this when I go to conferences, like, Association of Fraternal Leadership Values, or NGLA. I'll go to a conference and I'll get people who come up to me, conspiratorial whispers, people of color within IFC and Panhellenic, and they'll talk about the fact that oftentimes they feel marginalized because what will happen is that their fellow sisters or their fellow brothers will sort of strip them of their cultural and racial identity, as though they're in a common kind of nothingness, right? They'll ask things like, why do you sound white? As though, being educated is a white characteristic versus a Black characteristic, which of course, if you just try to follow the logic, if you sound white and you're educated, then what does Blackness sound like? Sounding uneducated, right? Or being othered, where, people, make their skin, make them feel that they're not a normal human being. I have locks, right? I can't tell you how many times people have said, and this happened literally 2 weeks ago, on an airplane, where people will go, can you mind if I touch your locks? And I'm like, yeah, I do mind you touch my locks. I've never had in my life just said, I've never touched blonde hair. Do you mind if I stick my hand in your head? No, but if you don't believe people have agency over their body, you can use their body. And then finally, this is the other thing that I see oftentimes, and this is what people will talk back. I never see you as a Black girl. This erasure of culture and race. But then again, campus racism is not new. This is back in 1989 at the University of California, Berkeley. You see that guy in the middle with a cap on? That is me. That is me actually marching. God, I was skinny then. I was eating Snicker bars every single day. But that's me. And so it's a longitudinal fight. It's something that we're trying to do, is to make each campus better each and every year, right? But there is a curious thing about this particular protest. Proposition 209 in California was a law that eliminated affirmative action in 1996. And yet this protest was in 2013. Why were they doing it? At the time, it's 17 years, basically, of students of color and white students who were getting in UC Berkeley the exact same way, without any added preference for race or gender or sexual orientation, nothing. It was the exact same thing, pretty much just based upon your test scores and your grades. And yet they still did this. And why were they doing this? They were really trying to send a message, is that we can still denigrate you, because even if you get in on quote unquote merit, we don't believe that you belong there. Right? So you see that, but what about on college campuses, right? What about things that are happening that our students are dealing with that really we look at and we think to ourselves, well, why haven't we questioned any of this? This is Jefferson Davis, and this is Jefferson Davis at the University of Texas. And one of the things that have occurred since Black students have been at the University of Texas, which I think were like the mid 1950s, was that they've been trying to get rid of the statue, which had been put up by like a lot of statues on college campuses. A rich donor who loved the Confederacy and decided he's going to put up a bunch of statues about the Confederacy. And every year they would say, oh, you know what? We need to get rid of this. We're protesting this. This is a representative of a person who wants to create a white supremacist state. We don't want this on campus. And the university would always come back and say, well, this is just, history. This is not about slavery. This is about the Confederacy. This is not the most ironic thing to say. It's not about slavery. It's about the Confederacy, right? And we can't erase history. And I used to always think to myself, what if I was a Jewish student at the University of Munich, and someone made a decision that they were going to have a rich donor decide that he loved Hitler and he was going to put a statue up on campus? Or the physics building was named after Hermann Göring, as like this building used to be, right? And the university said back to the Jewish students who were saying, we need to get rid of this building. We need to strip this building's name off of this building. They said, well, we can't really erase history, but what we can do, and this is a solution that people have been doing left and right, is we can put a plaque underneath explaining how odious these people were. But we're going to still keep the name there, and you're going to have to get your physics class from there. You would think that the university didn't have your values, see your humanity in any types of their decisions, right? Well, we've been seeing this. This handsome fella, Harvey Jordan, Dr. Harvey Jordan, was a eugenicist in the 1920s. He was at the University of Virginia. was one of the main pushers of a law in the 1920s that sterilized tens of thousands of African Americans. He once wrote for Science magazine that when he looked about African Americans, he was like, basically, we were just basically close to the evolutionary scale as apes. And for years, the Harvey Jordan Medical Center was a place of honor for him until a couple of years ago, and I will take a partial credit. Blackballed came out and they decided, wait, maybe this is a bad look. And they decided to name it after the first Black medical school student to graduate out of University of Virginia, Dr. Vivian Penn. But he's not even the harshest one. You have Richard Russell, segregationist Democrat. The U.S. Senate building is still named after Richard Russell. And he said during the Civil Rights Movement that he didn't see Black people as equals. He considered it to be an insult to be Black, to say that he stood for equality. And yet, if you go to the University of Georgia, Richard Russell Hall right there. But the most odious one of them all is Ben Pitchford Tillman, former Confederate. He was part of a group, a vigilante group called the Red Shirts, who slaughtered, and I don't mean just killed, I mean slaughtered an African-American militia in 1876 in Hamburg, called the 1876 Hamburg Massacre. He was, even in a time of white supremacy, other white people were like, you, even I may be racist, but you are a white supremacist. In 1906, Theodore Roosevelt was a new president. He decides that he's going to invite Booker T. Washington to dine at the White House. For the very first time, an African-American has been invited to dine at the White House. And that was a bridge too far. So Ben Pitchford Tillman says, hey, this is going to require us killing 1,000 niggas in the South before they learn their place again. 417 African Americans died during a spasm a year later. And yet, Clemson University, Tillman Hall. Now, the most curious one of all in terms of the statues is centered at Texas A&M. And it's named after this guy, Lawrence Soul Ross. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but my name is Lawrence Ross. Now, is that a coincidence? Kind of not. Lawrence Soul Ross's father, Shapley Ross, was the founder of Waco, Texas. Where's my family from? Waco, Texas. I'm not sure my grandfather, because I'm a junior, but I'm not sure if they decided because of his name to say put Lawrence in the family. But we probably, I think we are we're on this particular plantation. Now, I had the pleasure of actually talking with the Texas A&M students, and they've been protesting Texas A&M for decades. They've been doing everything they can to get rid of it. I came up with a unique solution. Instead of taking it down, I said we should just put my face on this and change the name just a tad, and I would be happy to lead a donation for this. They said they'd keep it under consideration. But it's one thing about the iconography on campus. It's another thing that the iconography and white supremacists see all of this. They look at this. They do know about the names of buildings and the iconography on campus and statues on campus, and they are thriving on college campuses. White nationalist, propaganda has doubled year after year, and really was only stopped, didn't end, but was only stopped because of the pandemic. Remember the neo-Nazi Tiki Torch march at University of Virginia in Charlottesville? We had a bunch of students in that. This Colorado State student was there, but the then president of the campus Republicans at Washington State was in the midst of it. There's a group called Identity Europa at Appalachian State who just are organizing as an open white nationalist, white supremacist club. You have white nationalists during Black History Month at the University of Tennessee covering up posters with the posters of Hitler. At Washington State, posters of illegal, find illegal aliens being put up in ethnic studies departments. University of Pennsylvania, Black freshmen were all put on a group me chat where they were all said that they were on a calendar to be lynched. Right after the election in 2016 of Donald Trump, there was a Old Dominion student who went on a YouTube rant talking about kill all niggas. And this guy, Andrew Oswald, he attended my lecture. I was kind of hyped about that, to tell you honestly. He came to my lecture, and he's a very odd guy. He first decided that he was going to put racist bumper stickers on random cars in a parking lot. Then he was also a member of the SGA and graduate student, and he lived across from the Black Cultural Center. So he decided that his dorm, he would put a Confederate flag in order to try to intimidate the Black students. It didn't. But he was only arrested once he was going across campus with a neo-Nazi who was carrying a Bowie knife. And so when you have conditions like this, students of color begin to protest. And it's really has been a multiracial, multi-ethnic type of protest. And the students at the University of Texas just began, we're going to paint Black Lives Matter on this podium, this pedestal every single day until you guys change your mind. And the University of Texas eventually decided to change its mind. And universities have been basically deciding that they want to look at their school and recognizing that some of these odious names need to change. Remember I talked about John C. Calhoun? Well, Calhoun College at Yale had been there forever. And I'm talking about, don't even have enough time to talk about how odious this man is. But if you have some time, go look up John C. Calhoun. He just basically thought that Black people were mules. That's the only thing I could just say, just it just beats the burden. And then you, of course, have the kind of the ubiquitous Confederate soldier that you find all through the South in town squares, the Silent Sam at the University of North Carolina. And again, generations of students have been protesting. And a few years back, they just decided, you know what? We're just going to pull it down. We're tired of protesting and no action happening. And then when we find universities who are trying to create a future that recognizes the positive values of the past, for example, at University of Mississippi, where they erected a James Meredith statue, the first African-American to integrate the University of Mississippi. He was a civil rights leader who got shot in the back during the Civil Rights March. Even that gets hit with white supremacy, where two members of Kappa Sigma decided to put a noose around his neck. Are we still thinking that Parker Rice and Levi Pettit are alone? Oh no, they are not alone. And you're about to see how much they are not alone. Symbols matter, and it's important for us to recognize this. And it's important for us to recognize this within our organizations, and it's also important to recognize this on college campuses. Now, here's the nitty gritty. How about talking about predominantly racism in predominantly white fraternities and sororities? Now, when we talk about racism within predominantly white fraternities and sororities, I have been lecturing for 22 years before all councils, and I never could understand the simple thing. Why were we so delicate when talking about racism, particularly for white students within IFC and Paladin? I just didn't understand it. It was all very ginger, like something was going to break. We say white fragility, I don't know about that, but there was some issue that was just, oh my goodness, we just can't be honest with what is actually going on within our organizations. I always like to say that the message was almost always boiled down to this. We were bad in the past, we're good now, live your values, and can we please stop talking about race, because I don't want any calls from your parents or from your advisors or from your alumni. And I promise you, I'll never talk about this again. This was pretty much what was happening. Now, it got a little bit better as what I say, the Black Lives Matter edition, is that as we start to learn more about diversity, equity, inclusion, we start to know the right words, right? We start to know some of the right words, but it's a little bit performative, right? So, perfect example. Right after the George Floyd murder, right during the case, IFC decided that they were going to put out a letter about what they were going to be doing, right? So what they decided to do is they were going to put out something to say what they were going to do for DEI. Now, you may not know this, that Alpha Phi Alpha is both in MPAC and in IFC, right? We're in both, right? But I've been a brother of Alpha Phi Alpha since I was 19 years old. And I'll be 37 years this April. I still look good though. But 37 years this year. I have never in my whole life, I have been an Alpha as long as you can be an Alpha, ever seen IFC spotlight Alpha. I may be proven wrong. I apologize then. But they decided, we need to see some Black faces. And so they found a picture of my fraternity brothers. Okay, great. The next thing was let's have a word salad statement that doesn't really say anything. Okay, doesn't say anything about police brutality, doesn't say anything about, the systemic issues. It just says vague things, right? And there was one part that got me. There was one part where they said, one part that was fine. It says, we're going to ensure our governing documents promote diversity. Fantastic. That's what I want. Perfect. And do not inadvertently further racism. Now I did not like that. I still stutter even when I think about it. The inadvertent part. Because there have been a lot of things when we talk about racism within IFC and Panhellenic, inadvertent is not one of the things. When we talk about racism within IFC Panhellenic, we are talking about things that happen on a regular basis. And when we talk about at the root, we see this from the earliest days. I don't care when we're talking about, say, for example, racist covenants. Oftentimes, the racist covenants, the covenants within IFC and Panhellenic would often be based upon both two things, race and religion. And so, for example, this covenant here said that people had to be white Gentile students. Or a lot of times it would be Aryan until obviously the Nazis came and they were like, let's scrub that, but it would be Caucasian, right? Or, of course, it would also be religious discrimination. 1949, a Jewish student at the University of New Hampshire tried to become a member of IFC organization, couldn't do it because he was Jewish. Now, after World War II, and this is the reason why I started my research in 1946 and on up, universities began talking about the fact we just had a world war, and we just saw what happens when we have racial genocide. And so what we want to do is examine what's happening on our college campuses and why are people discriminating and why are we tolerating discrimination on our college campuses. So they began demanding that IFC and Panhellenic start to stop discriminating with with Rush in particular, right? Now you would think that would be okay. We'll look at it. No, IFC in particular they said it with their, the kids say, they said it with their chest. They are not going to stop discriminating. And in fact, the chair of NIC, David Embry, and I put him as a bartender because he still is the weirdest thing. He was known as, he wrote the greatest bartender's guide that people still use today. Most amazing thing. I was like, I didn't, when you do research, you find the weirdest things. But anyway, he was the head of IFC, and he said, no, turn that frown upside down. Discrimination is actually a good thing. I want the discriminating eye, ear, body, and soul. And so for 20 years, IFC and Panhellenic used to fight desegregation, basically, within the courts, all basically trying to center itself around the First Amendment, not freedom of speech, but freedom of association. Now, of course, when we talk about this, every time someone from IFC tells me, or Panhellenic comes to me, oh, no, we had this person who became a member in 1954, like Bill Laurie for Beta Theta Pi, right? Great, fine. You see this in individual chapters. Too often what would happen is that the national organizations would change the rules. So, for example, they would get rid of the racist clause within a constitution, but then create a rule to say that before one could initiate new members, you had to send the national organization pictures of your rushies. And so that's how you perpetuate it and keep racism hidden. And just because you allow Bill Laurie and Beta Theta Pi, it's not evidence against racism within Beta Theta Pi, because this is Beta Theta Pi too at the University of Florida in blackface. Now, if there's anything I want all of you to understand, is that understand this Martin Luther King quote. And this is about something else. It's about middle class and people of good faith who don't do things, right? But I want to use this as a quote within IFC and Panhellenic. And it's very simple. Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. And we see sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity around campus racism within IFC and Panhellenic each year at Halloween, Martin Luther King's birthday, Black History Month, and Cinco de Mayo. Every single year. And it's not like they shouldn't know it, because every fraternity and sorority life creates a colorful infographic to show them, hey, you do this, you're going to get in trouble. And they still do it because they say that basically, oh, it's just a joke. Oh, it's something else. Let's see what's happening. Kappa Alpha with their Old South Party. Now, to be fair, Kappa Alpha has been trying to get rid of their Confederate flag and the Confederate iconography, but some still do it. And if you look at it, they all dress up as the Old South because, who didn't love the Old South except for maybe Black people? And there in the front is a person who's in blackface. And of course, written down the middle of his chest on his t-shirt is the word slave. Okay, then you have good pickings tonight for Delta Zeta at the University of Louisville. When I was in the archive looking, they said they won for best homecoming float in blackface. Now, this is all generations. I'm going to show you for all generations. This is not just Gen Z or millennials or Gen Xers or baby boomers or the silent generation, the greatest generation. This is all generations, right? Kappa Sig at Duke having an Asia Prime party, complete with a racist email to be sent out, a racist email invitation. Phi Gamma Delta decided that they were going to dress up, because Fiji, they were going to dress up in blackface, full all body. Deeks, Delta Kappa Epsilon at Louisiana State, LSU, they at tailgates, in front of the tailgates, almost always put together some sort of racist, homophobic, or misogynist banner out front of their home. And they hang it, and of course, people start complaining. Now, LSU can't do anything about that. Rightfully so. That is what free speech, First Amendment is. The state cannot abridge their right for speech. But Delta Kappa Epsilon can. They're a private organization. They could do it in 5 seconds. The minute they saw it, they could kick them out in 5 seconds. Now, you wonder, why don't they do that? Maybe it's because 20 years earlier, just down the way at Tulane in New Orleans, Delta Kappa Epsilon was dressed in blackface going through black neighborhoods. Beta Theta Pi with a cornucopia of white supremacist iconography, the KKK uniform, the Confederate flag, blackface, and then, of course, the noose around the neck. Are we still just pointing to Levi Pettit and Parker Rice at the University of Oklahoma? Pi Kappa Alpha at University of Georgia in blackface. Tau Kappa Epsilon at Arizona State for their blackout for Martin Luther King's Day. Now, they knew they couldn't do blackface, but they recognized they wanted to make sure that you knew that they were basically talking about black people. So they adopted the dress of the inner city, low-hanging pants, basketball tops. And of course, if that didn't nail it home, watermelon. Alpha Chi Omega at Auburn University. Then it became popular to just say, well, if we can't do blackface, we're going to pretend to deal with the dysfunction of the inner city. Tri-Delts during their Bloods and Crips party. Clemson Christmas with Sigma Alpha Epsilon. Kappa Alpha, University of Georgia. Sigma Kappa decided that they were going to dress like Native Americans at University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Kappa Kappa Gamma back in the 60s in blackface. Again, this notion of entertainment and joking centered around lynching and killing people of color is something that is seen over and over and over. Alpha Chi Omega, a couple of years ago, Georgia Southern. Now, I understand why this happens. I understand why this happens. A lot of IFC and panel members think that they're being provocative. They're not being PC. And when they do this, that they're going to shock. And that's what they want to do within that space. And also because people of color are not in that space, who is there to actually be a counter? Who is even there to actually be a counter to actually look at them and say, I see what you're doing. So they believe that they're doing it in a space that is safe for them. But what they don't really understand is that they're really tying themselves to one of the oldest entertainment forms, which is minstrelsy, which was designed and based upon the idea of Black people being human, whether or not they were free or enslaved. It was so ludicrous that you can make comedy characters out of it. Jim Crow, the thing we talk about in terms of segregation, is a minstrel character. And we also forget that not everyone, and particularly BIPOC people on campus, believe that Greek rows and Greek houses are safe places for them to be. University of Wisconsin did a study where they asked students of color about Greek rows, and they basically said as soon as the alcohol began to flow, so did the racial epithets begin to flow too. And as if to prove it, University of Madison suspends Sigma Alpha Epsilon for calling Black women niggas and bitches as they were walking by. At the University of Southern California, Rennie Sampath, an Indian American president of the SGA, was walking through the Greek row, and IFC man threw an empty liquor bottle, just barely missing her, and called her an Indian piece of shit. Then you have Chi Omega at Penn State. And the biggest thing, they're mocking Mexicans, saying, we'll mow lawn for weed or beer. I don't cut grass, I smoke it. But what always gets me is the gravity of this is how many people decided that they were going to participate. In organizations where we constantly stress values, each one of them made a decision to participate. Kappa Alpha Theta at Columbia University. This was just one. They had every different group in their quote unquote beer Olympics. Kappa Sig at Rollins, the Run for the Border Party. Kappa Sig at Baylor. And I'm not trying to beat up on Kappa Sig, but they have a lot of these. Kappa Sig at Baylor, a Cinco de Drinko party. AD Pi at Texas State. Welcome to the tribe. And then you have the University of Alabama, which had a really bad year a couple of years ago. Member of Alpha Phi at the University of Alabama was caught on video talking about, get me away from these niggas in the back of a car. Chi Omega talking about, after recruitment, talking about Chi Omega got no niggas. Not the first time I've actually heard this in terms of being, I've seen this in the archives. This woman kind of took the cake though. Haley Berry, Barber, this is in 2018. She was from New Jersey, member of Alpha Phi. She's just become a new member of Alpha Phi. And someone had checked her about saying the word nigga on Martin Luther King's birthday. She decided to go on Instagram and say, I don't care if it's Martin Luther King's birthday, nigga, 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 I'm in the South now. Boom. Well, Alpha Phi kicked her out, and I think she transferred out of University of Alabama. And when IFC and Panhellenic haven't been mocking ethnicities and races, they've decided, okay, well, what about the homeless? Why don't we have a party about the homeless? The Teeks, Old South Party, where they decide to have people act like slaves. And then again, the same thing over and over, this notion of killing Black people as entertainment. So you can't be surprised that people of color in particular are always trying to get rid of this year after year, year after year. And again, what happens to freedom of speech? Hey, freedom of speech is still there. It doesn't mean freedom from consequences. And it's even leaking into high schools. I don't know if you remember this, but this was in the same year of the SAC and SEE with a high school in Arizona. And these were high schoolers. They all wore different t-shirts and were supposed to say something like, congratulations to the class of, and they were like, oh, guess what this spells? And I love how the media put blocks over their faces. But then again, I'm not part of the media, so I believe that people should actually be accountable for what they do. It's important to understand that everything I've been talking about always has a level, whether or not it's at the policy level or individual level or the chapter level or institutional level, has a component of violence, metaphorical violence, psychological violence, or real violence. It's important to understand that. So for example, when you are able to get that into the stream, the same thing when we talk about, when we talk about anti-Semitism, if you can make it something that is normal, that where people by default think that it's absolutely normal and people don't think that it's actually absurd, well, then they can kill you. They can kill you, or they can kill you, and like I said, metaphorically, psychologically, or physically. A couple of years ago, Kappa Alpha Order decided that their chapter decided that they were going to go shooting. And what they decided, the target that they used was a memorial to Emmett Till. Emmett Till, of course, was murdered. He was a teenager who was murdered. And it was so gruesome. I put this up here because I want you to know what happened if you've never seen this. It was so gruesome that it repulsed the country. And one of the things that you must realize is when students in particular on college campus and members of fraternities and sororities do that, they are doing this consciously. This is not just happenstance. They are saying that if we could, we would. 2 years ago, a Black student at the University of Arizona was put in critical condition by two white students who were part of white supremacist group. 1 year later, during the pandemic, white supremacists placarded posters all around University of Arizona. And then Yik Yak, I heard Yik Yak is back. Yik Yak is an anonymous, it's a terrible place. Yik Yak is an anonymous social platform. It had gone away, but it was a haven for white supremacists, anti-Semites, misogynists. It was a haven because you could post anything and a person could be right next to you. This guy, Hunter Park went to the University of Missouri, but not the main campus. And he was upset about the protests that were happening with the Black students. And so he gets on Yik Yak and he makes a decision to say, I'm going to stand my ground tomorrow and shoot every Black person I see. Even the person he was talking to was like, whoa, he got arrested for that. This guy, John Edgar Rust, was a leader of social media white supremacist groups. He had gathered an arsenal of weapons and was going to Howard University to be able to shoot people at Howard. When they asked him why, he said it's not murder if they're Black. Going back all the way back to that Alpha Phi member holding up that banana, saying, is he on 1/16 Black? Basically saying that Black people are not human, so how could it be murder? And we've already had a death on the University of Maryland campus. Richard Collins was a student, ROTC student at Bowie State. He was going to visit a friend at University of Maryland. He's leaving the campus and he gets stabbed to death by a guy who had white supremacist ties. That guy just got life in prison. So it's important for us to recognize that what we're seeing is not something that we should take lightly. And we have to deconstruct the systems of inequities. One of my heroes, and I do mean one of my earliest heroes, is Angela Davis. I was a little kid and I just remember seeing her go in a courtroom. I was like, she's cool. And that's all I knew. I didn't know anything about politics, but she was my hero, right? And she's, racism is systemic and its outbursts are not isolated incidents. And it's important for us to be able to make sure that our members, our students are understanding of what racism actually is. Racists do racist things, and I'm not honestly worried about them. We'll be able to find them soon enough. What I'm more interested in are the non-racists. They watch people. They just watch people and think that they are morally superior because they don't see themselves in those other people. I don't do things like that, but they don't take any action. You got to be anti-racist. And I think anti-racist has kind of become a cliche now and right about now. It's kind of like a catchphrase about being anti-racist. I think it's more about being active in being able to deconstruct racism wherever you see it. That's the exact same thing you got to do in life, particularly if we decide that, we're going to be a member of a fraternity or sorority, and we decide that we're going to put letters on our chests that say that we are going to designate ourselves as leader in our communities, on campus or within our communities. We got to be not just anti-racist, but fight anti-Semitism, homophobia, sexism, and misogyny. That's what we should be doing. And it's important for us to make our spaces places where people realize that. We got to deconstruct the public policy, the educational public policy, and just recognize that the school systems are not equal. SATs and ACTs don't predict what happens in the future for you at a school. They just tell you what you've been exposed to. Deconstruct IFC and Panhellenic organizations. I'm not talking about getting rid of organizations. I am a life member of Alpha Phi Alpha. I paid a lot of money for that. You're not getting rid of Alpha Phi Alpha, okay? But we have to take real good note of what's happening within our organizations and then start to pivot and listen to our students. There's a student that, within Kappa Kappa Gamma, a woman of color in Kappa Kappa Gamma who's talked about the racism within Kappa Kappa Gamma. And within SDT, we just had a young woman who basically decided to resign from her executive board because she didn't think that she was being heard. You have to hear these students. You have to do exit interviews once they leave campus to find out what was done right and what was done wrong. And in your conferences and workshops, you've got to make sure that their voices aren't assumed by other people who don't want to talk about it, who are race averse versus race aware. And you don't have to wait until students of color, and you don't have to partner with students of color to do things that are inclusive, right? Most schools, a lot of schools, predominantly white institutions, are in minority neighborhoods. You don't need an ambassador. Do some work in those neighborhoods. And also tap into your DNA. For Delta Gamma, they were talking about, their DNA is doing good, means doing better. Whatever, make it work within the thing that everyone is bought into, okay? Deconstruct student bodies. We can't have diverse institutions and diverse organizations and diverse chapters if we don't, first of all, look and have diverse student bodies. You can have all the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs you want in the world, but if there are no Black students or Latinx students or Asian American Pacific Islander students in there on campus, you can't have a diverse student body. And also, if you make a decision that you want to partner with NPHC or a cultural Greek organization, don't just invite them to come and stroll and step at your event. Don't just do that, because they're not entertainers. What you want to do is equity. And when I mean equity, I mean this. Oftentimes, IFC Panhellenic chapters are large, but due to the size of the student population at a predominantly white institution, NPHC organizations, Divine Nine organizations are small. So if 10 deltas, members of Delta Sigma Theta, decide that they want to go to want to work with a Sigma Delta Tau on a philanthropy, and all 10 go. And then they say, hey, we're having a philanthropy, and Sigma Delta Tau has 100 members, and you send 10 members to their philanthropy. Well, they're not going to look at that very well. They're going to be very upset. because they're going to say, we brought 100% of our membership and you brought 10% of yours. Why would I want to work with you in the future? And also, we got to be able to value students of color, whether or not they're in IFC, Panhellenic, or just on campus. If not, you end up basically doing things like at the University of Florida, where they were pulling off students who were strolling. Deconstruct the campus environment. Again, don't wait for minority students to do this for you. These white students were like, this is not my heritage. They oppose them where they are. I love what Yale says. The students at Yale say, we out here, we've been here, we ain't leaving, and we are loved. And why do we want that? It's because campus racism makes students leave. Deconstruct the value system. Don't just put out word salad type of statements. Have things that really mean something. And we don't give a damn about your Black, Latinx, Asian, or Native American best friend. That doesn't get you out of racism. Parker Rice, he had a Black best friend, didn't stop him from talking about lynching African Americans from a tree. And I want to leave you with this one last thing. This is me pre-pandemic at Belmont College in Tennessee. And right over my shoulder, you'll note, if you can tell this is pre-pandemic because we're all crowded, you'll note a woman with a black and white striped sweater with red hair. That's D'Ebony Graves. And D'Ebony Graves was a wonderful young woman. I was talking to her. She remembered Delta Sigma Theta. Talking to her, she just had all these dreams about what she was going to do. And I made note of her. About 6 months after that, I remember waking up and getting on Facebook. And I got there. You know how your timeline is consumed by one particular story? It turns out in Tennessee, at 3 a.m, a gunman had gone into a Waffle House and started shooting. And one of my fraternity brothers, James Shaw, had wrestled the gun away, but not before he had shot and murdered D'Ebony Graves. He was a member of a white supremacist group called the Sovereign Soldiers. And it always haunts me because D'Ebony Graves is dead. She's dead. She is no longer on this earth. And it was all because someone walked into a Waffle House and believed that she was not a human being. And what we talk about in campus racism is that campuses may not be utopias or educational Disneylands, but they are kind of a testing ground for what we're going to do in society. And what we want to do, whether or not it's Alpha Phi Alpha or Sigma Delta Tau, we want to make sure that we're training our members to be proactive in making sure that we create a campus environment and then later in America where everyone basically is able to contribute to this great experiment of democracy. And if we're not doing that, and if we just are allowing things like white supremacy or systemic racism to just simply fester on our campuses or to fester within policies, and we're not doing things to just deconstruct that, then we're doing a disservice to everyone, in particular, young women like D'Ebony Graves. Thank you all. I appreciate you. I know my lecture is long, but I definitely appreciate you. I'd be happy to take some questions in the chat if need be. Any questions, I'll just answer as I go.
In the chat, or can we say it out loud?
Oh, you can say it out loud. Yeah, that would help me because you would help my.
There's a lot of
you help my bad eyes.
Hi, so I work at Western Illinois University, and
yeah,
one of the things that I think we think about a lot when trying to help our like Panhellenic sororities support our like NPHC groups is about like not taking up a lot of space when they go to their events. So like there's a lot of members, and so like 56 Panhellenic women attending a chapter's event that they have 5 members at, we're always like very like conscious of that. So what are your thoughts there?
Oh no, well, I mean, how I look at this, okay, if you just show up without kind of like, you know, a discussion and conversation beforehand, yes, that would be shocking to the thing. But you know, one of the things that oftentimes happens is that if you are, you know, if for example, presidents get with other presidents, let's say, you know, SET says they're going to get together with the AKs, right? And the presidents get together and say, hey, we really want to support you. And your event is, you know, kind of aligns with what we're doing. Not only do we want to come, but you tell us how we can help out, right? Those are the things that make you golden amongst other, the organizations, because they're like, oh, you really want to do more than just kind of have a photo op, right?
Yeah.
And also, if say for example, if it's if it's a fundraiser, well, a lot of those groups depend upon having a large amount of people come and pay the $5 or whatever it is as a contribution to allow them to do more programs. I always kind of joke is that one of the kind of the deficits of having such small populations for MPHC is that it takes 6 months worth of kind of fundraising before you can actually do all your projects. And so it's really about kind of the precursor, trust before the actual implementation. And once you get that, then I think what happens is that the Panhellenic organization that's there, they get really kind of rewarded for coming and really kind of ingratiating themselves, regardless, instead of just saying, we just brought a whole bunch of people, we're standing over on this side. I don't think that's necessary. And then if there is pushback, you also have to hold your MPHC accountable too. You have to ask MPHC, well, what do you want? Do you want support or do you not want support? Because support looks like this. And if it doesn't, they don't want support, well then, that's kind of what you don't get. But I think there's a happy medium in between that. I'm one for always seeing those students in those spaces. Also, because the more trust that's built up, what's also going to happen is that not every Black student wants to be a Divine Nine member. I say my thing is always you find fraternalism where you find fraternalism. But when you have those students who come up to you and say, yeah, I'm not interested in Alpha and Kappa and all the rest of stuff, and you say, well, what are you interested in? Well, I'm interested in IFC. You will only, in that space, send them to spaces that you trust. And that's usually with people that you've interacted with. So if a young Black woman doesn't want to be AK Delta, Sigma Gamma Rho Zeta, and she's like, what do you recommend? Well, they can say, well, I know, I don't know about the rest of them, but I do know about Sigma Delta Tau, and they're cool. And they'll have a personal relationship, and they'll feel comfortable about sending them into those spaces. Yeah, that Zoom uncomfortable silence.
I just have a question. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no problem. Just before people start to kind of tinker out, we just wanted to give a quick thank you to folks, and then people can absolutely keep asking questions.
Yeah.
So just wanted to say thank you so much, Lawrence Ross, for being here and for that phenomenal presentation. I hope that every SDT here will take this knowledge and inspiration to do better work in our organization and in our communities. And thank you to the SDT Foundation for sponsoring this event. If you all check the chat, you will see a link for a survey so that you can give us some feedback on how we can continue to provide you incredible opportunities like this. So thank you so much, and please continue to go back to your questions.
Oh, yeah.
I was just going to ask, do you come to schools for workshops at all? Just
like yeah. I do my lectures. I do my lectures, and I also do a campus racism hackathon, which is kind of a larger kind of, well, the lectures are the macro, and then the campus racism hackathons are the micro, specific to the school. So yes, I am. I loathe to go out there and go, hey, I'm still booking, but I am booking March and April. So I just didn't have a chance to do it in January and February. So I am still booking. I only have like one lecture in March, but if you're interested, just email me.
Okay, no problem. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I go to a performing arts school, so I was just thinking like it would be a really
which school?
Pace University.
Oh, really? Yeah, my son just graduated from Art Center College of Design. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm a directing major for stage and film, and then 2 minors, 1 in political science and 1 in film and screen studies.
See, you are my tribe. We are MFA. I'm an MFA in film, in screenwriting.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So we could talk film all day.
Of course. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any others? Did I miss anything? Oh, there's one question in here I like. I just saw. What is the best way to be an ally for our sisters of color? You know what? Do you mind if I tell a story? Right after Ferguson, I talked to a Black member of Delta Gamma, and she was talking about the fact that, boy, she just really didn't want to go to chapter meeting. She went to a school right outside of in St. Louis, right outside of Ferguson. She'd grown up in the area, and she said, "I just don't want to be the person answering all the questions," you know. And so when she gets to the chapter meeting, she's just steeling herself, to be the person to answer all the questions about, Ferguson and Michael Brown. So she gets there. Her president, she said, just self-describes. She's like, oh, she's, like your blonde-haired, your sorority, quote unquote, sorority girl. She gets up there and she says, this is about police brutality and the fact that we all grew up in the collar cities of around St. Louis, and we have been blind. She was like, what the hell is going on? And she was explaining police brutality in ways that she had no idea she knew, right? And she said all of the young members who had grown up in all those areas that have pretty much been segregated around St. Louis were all shaking their head and they were listening. And it was a peer-to-peer thing. And she said, that is the minute that I knew my sister loved me. And she's like, she had taken the time to learn before all of this and had taken all the time to then go into it and explain in a way that did it better than me, to the point to where she said, I was trying to raise my hand and say, do y'all need anything else? And that's what it is. It's about demonstrating. It's about listening. It's about understanding. Everything is always different to people in terms of, when we bring people together. That's fine. Differences are fine. We're just learning about each other, but you have to ask, and you have to be willing to go on that journey. I also tell this story, and this is specific. This is when I was a college brother, and my chapter had 35 brothers in it. So we were a large Alpha chapter, right? And so we did an exchange with ZBT. And so we were telling the African-American story about Alpha Phi Alpha, and ZBT was telling the Jewish story about ZBT. And I was fascinated because I'm a history, my history degree. So I'm just fascinated, right? And I'm sitting there and I raise my hand because I'm all nervous and everything. And I'm like, I hope I'm not being anti-Semitic because I'm all nervous and everything. I was like, but I don't think I had any Jewish friends in high school. And my fraternity brother who went to high school with me hit me like with his elbow right in the ribs. And he said, fool, you went to a Jesuit Catholic school. That's the reason why you didn't have any. And they died laughing. And I was like, oh, it didn't have. And so one of the things the reason I say that is because we also have to give people grace. I have to give people grace to not understand something and not hammer them the minute that they're trying to understand something. Whether or not that is, when we talk about gender, because a lot of times, we men, we will become the greatest evangelists. Once we learn something about gender, we will go out there and we'll start mansplaining, or sexual orientation and all the rest. But we still need to leave room because we want people to continue to learn. And eventually to get to a point where they learn and they embody it and they take action. And that's what we're looking for. Thank you all. Thank you. I'm seeing all this. Thank you. Thank you so much. I was really looking forward to this. I was like, seriously. Is that the last question? Any more?
I don't see any other questions in the chat. So thank you so much again for being here. Margot, do you have any closing thoughts?
I don't. I just want to thank the SCT Foundation one last time for this all-member program. We try to offer these quarterly and touch topics that are important to our members and to our community. So I'm so thankful, Lawrence, that you shared your time and expertise with us. This was really impactful and so much to digest. And I'm sure everybody feels super motivated to do better. So thank you again for our sisters who joined us, and of course to Lawrence for being here tonight with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You are now on my roster of the organizations that I truly love. So I'm going to tell you that when you do things like this, I really truly love that. So appreciate y'all.
Thank you.